Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to be presenting a commentary on some ideas presented by the British historian Tom Holland. I think that might be backwards, in a book that came out last year called Dominion, The Making of the Western Mind. Um, and I'd like to make a commentary on Tom Holland's ideas, um, a commentary on some of the ideas upon which he draws, particularly the ideas advanced by Friedrich Nietzsche in the 19th century. And I've listened to Tom Holland speak on various in various interviews, and I've found the arguments that he's presenting really compelling, fascinating, interesting, and it's making a lot of things click for me. And I'm halfway through the book Dominion, and I thought that what I would do is work through and share some of my thinking about Tom Holland's ideas and my current kind of interpretation of them. And hopefully that'll be valuable to you. So let's get into it. I've called this presentation The Triumph of Love on the Revolution of Christian Morality. So a source for some of the themes and ideas of this presentation is a book which came out in September last year called Dominion, in which the historian Tom Holland traces the transformation of morality from the Greco-Roman world to through the Christian era. And Holland is basically tracing a transformation in morality, in moral paradigms. And so let me lay out a few things about what Tom Holland's up to in the book. So Holland traces the roots of contemporary Western liberal values through a review of approximately the last 2,500 years of our history. I've heard Tom say in interviews that the inspiration and the impetus for the writing of the book was to trace back the roots and go back and reflect on and critique his own values. So it's starting from the position of I'm someone living in the United Kingdom. I'm someone who's grown up with a certain set of cultural assumptions and values, which we might call Western liberal values. The value of respect for the individual, the value of individual sovereignty and the rights of the individual, the value of free speech, the value of equality, that men and women should both have the vote, for example, and all of these Western liberal values are kind of in the air, in the atmosphere. They're present to hand, and Tom Holland's kind of saying, okay, these are the values that I have. These are the ways through which I'm interpreting the world. This is the lens through which I'm looking at things and judging whether things are right and wrong. From whence did they come? What is the origin of these values? What is the story of these values? And so the project really in Dominion, as far as I understand it, is for Tom Holland to go back to the Greco-Roman world, particularly takes a look at Rome, and to see what were their values, what was the morality like then, and how has it got to the place it is. How has our morality developed in the West to the place it is now? So, what's the story there? Um, a pivotal moment in this story is the life of Jesus of Nazareth in the first century AD. The life of Jesus transfigures history such that we can speak of a distinct before and after this crucial event, as implicitly acknowledged, for instance, in the structure of time. BC, before Christ, and Anno AD, Anno Domini. These categories are kind of implicit in our model of time in the West. And so there is an implicit assumption that there is a distinct before and after. But specifically, I think that Holland's argument is to say that there is a before the life of Jesus in terms of moral assumptions in the West, and then there is an after, and that this is actually a crucial moment in history. So I'm just kind of giving a content overview and a summary of the arguments to follow, really. So the before, the Greco-Roman morality stresses the superiority of the strong over the weak, with an emphasis on pride. The credo of Maximus in Gladiator is strength and honor. So I thought that was quite a pithy way of summarizing the Greco-Roman morality. Strength and honor. Strength being the virtue of the warrior, of the one who dominates and the one who succeeds, and honor, the kind of sense of pride and respect, which comes to the heroic and victorious in such a culture. Friedrich Nietzsche called this the master morality. It is the morality of the dominators, the superior, and the strong. And this pervaded the very moral fabric of ancient Rome and ancient Greece, upon which Rome drew much of its culture. After the life of Jesus in the first century, Christian morality suggests, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Meekness is an image associated with humility, with yielding, surrender, and patience. Turn the other cheek, the ability to endure suffering, which is what patience means. And so there's something quite radical and quite transformative in this notion that blessed are the meek. And this is what Friedrich Nietzsche called the slave morality, whereby the emphasis now is upon the weak, the disempowered. And it's actually saying that there is tremendous value in those people, in people who suffer, in people who are at the fringes of a culture, and the people who are enslaved, the people who are outside of the established moral paradigm. Blessed are the meek kind of says, how about we look there? We look to the fringes, and that is where the good lies. That we should draw those people in. Into the culture, because we are all of one spirit, essentially. So we have Nietzsche's master morality, which I'm calling Greco-Roman morality, and we have Nietzsche's slave morality, which is Christian morality. And the pivotal point in all of this is the life of Christ in the 1st century AD. Now, it's interesting because Tom Holland is a historian, and a historian, as I understand it, with particular interest in ancient Rome. And so much of his previous work had focused upon the Roman world, and his that and so he brings, I think, a very interesting and informed perspective to what Nietzsche called the master morality. And so Holland's book, as I say, I'm halfway through, yet to complete it, but I've also listened to Holland speak in many different places on the internet about the themes and the arguments in his book, and this this talk is just a commentary on where I'm at in my thinking about it. But what Holland's book does is it starts about, I think it's around 500 BC or 450 BC or something like that, and starts in the Greco-Roman world and then moves through history into Christendom. And so it gives a lot of puts a lot of historical meat on the bones, let's say, of this philosophical concept from Nietzsche of the master morality and the slave morality. And it tells a historical story, which I find particularly interesting and compelling. So, as heirs to Christendom, citizens of the West live with this transfigured image of weakness, and it serves as a deep and foundational moral axiom. In this sense, Christ is the rock upon which our house is built. So, what do I mean by that? Well, we're going to get into all of it, but what I think Holland does so brilliantly and helps us to do is to look through the eyes of the Romans, to imagine ourselves within the cultural paradigm that was ancient Rome, that was dominant in the 1st century AD. And from that lens, you see weakness, the image of weakness. Weakness is it's like held in complete disdain, and so much such is the pride and the superiority of the credo strength and honor, that the weak are considered nothing, not human, not worthy of any value. And thus the dramatic evidence for this idea was the cross in ancient Rome, where um, um, the weak and the dishonorable are put upon the cross. And this is what happens. This is what happens to those who challenge the strength, the honor, the power of the master morality. This is what happens to such people. That's what the image of the cross meant to the Romans. That's what crucifixion meant to them. And so when I speak of the image of weakness being transfigured, what I mean, and that we live with the inheritance of that transfigured image, what I mean to say is that what was once in the culture that gave birth to this, or in which this practice was prevalent, the crucifixion, the ancient Roman culture, what was once held to be nothing, mere nothing, not considered good within the moral paradigm, the weak, the dishonorable. What was once there has now become inverted, because that's what Christianity did. If we speak symbolically, because the cross in the Christian era now becomes a symbol of hope, of faith, of love. And so the whole meaning of the cross becomes utterly transfigured and transformed. And Holland is looking at what that means culturally, what it means that a cross, which was a symbol of oppression, becomes a symbol of hope for the oppressed. So here's a bit of here's how I've kind of represented it. BC, the old dispensation; AD, the new dispensation; the transfiguration in the life and the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. And the words I'm going to use are power and love for these different paradigms. Power, the Greco-Roman morality of strength being superior to weakness, and love and Western liberalism, the cultural context in which we find ourselves in the West, that as being I've lost my train of thought there. Oh yeah, that as being, valuing the powerless, the weak, the disenfranchised over the strong, that the oppressed have value, and that actually, well, that the oppressed have value. Like that is a huge paradigm shift. On the one hand, with the master morality, the oppressor has value and has predominance, the master morality, whereas in the slave morality, the oppressed have value. And actually, the notion is that there is great power, if you want to use that word, in patience, humility, kindness, compassion, etc. That actually that is the truest source of power. And so that is the establishment of the ethic of love versus the ethic of power. So let's move through this. Yeah, so we have power, the strong dominating the weak, and we have love, the weak being the locale of the divine, or I don't want to say the weak dominate the strong because I don't think that's the right language. Is that the oppressed have value, whereas, let me put it that way, in the paradigm of power, the strong have value and the weak are nothing, whereas in the paradigm of love, the weak have value. So I've put that secular moral order and a Christian moral order. Secular, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but I suppose it's all right. So I think we'll be able to make sense of that as we go through it. So the paradigm of love, where we're starting, as I said, Holland's argument kind of progresses from the assumption that there is present to hand a certain morality, with which is just the fabric of his culture, and therefore this is kind of like the starting point, and then he goes and traces back. So the paradigm of love I've put up here, where the weak and the oppressed have value. So I've written a few things about Western liberal values. I've got the Protestant Reformation here. I've got a few historical moments in recent history. The Protestant Reformation, the suffragette movement, the civil rights movement, and the LGBT rights movement. So let me read out a few of these things. So compassion for the weak is an ethic deeply woven into the fabric and assumptions of Western liberal culture. Martin Luther cared for the disenfranchised laity in the context of the perceived oppression of the Catholic Church. So I'd like you to recognize a pattern in this, and I think this is the pattern that Holland's speaking to, as I understand it. So the pattern is Roman moral order, like no, let me put it this way: oppressive moral order in the guise of Rome, um, transformed and transfigured by the life of Christ. So oppressive moral order transfigured by the oppressed. That's what happened. That's the pattern that happened in the life of Christ. And it is a historically astounding fact, I think, that I believe it was Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, 3rd or 4th century, Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity a few centuries after the life of Christ. So, the historical fact is that the the oppressive morality is subverted by the oppressed in the life of Christ, and the whole Roman moral order is transfigured by this fundamental pattern of oppressive moral order. Oppressed has value, and then through the integration of that, the moral order becomes transformed. And so that's kind of, if you like, the paradigmatic pattern of what Christ did in the 1st century. And then you see echoes of it throughout history. This is, as I understand, the point that Holland's making. And so you see it in the Protestant Reformation, where you have an oppressive moral order, which ironically is the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, in the early 16th century, 1500s. You have that oppressive structure, and you have an oppressed, and this is embodied in the figure of Martin Luther, a German monk. And he says, look, there are all these things that that matter to my conscience, to my heart, and to the people of Germany. So the laity. So he wrote a lot in dialect, in German dialect, as I understand it. So the language he used, and he used the recently invented printing press, which was really important to spread the message of the Bible, of the Scripture, to the people, to the laity, instead of the clergy. And the Roman Catholic Church is basically saying that there's a clergy, there is a priesthood descended, given a sacred duty by Christ, and that those are the guardians and the stewards of the faith. Whereas Martin Luther's saying something really radical and saying, no, actually, you know, people should be able to interpret the Bible themselves. They should be able to read it, pay attention to the Scripture, and if they live lives of faith, then they too have access to the faith. So that's a whole conversation in itself. The Protestant Reformation is a huge historical moment, of course, but I'd like to say, and I'm not actually there in the book yet. I'm before that, so I'm interested to see what Tom Holland has to say. I'm going to presume that he treats the Protestant Reformation, but the point is that we have this pattern of oppressive moral order, subverted and transformed by the value and attention to the dignity of the oppressed, and we have the same pattern echoing now in the Protestant Reformation, where Martin Luther saying, look, the German people deserve to have Scripture in their language, in their tongue, and so they can understand it, so they can engage with it, so they can live lives of faith, and that transforms the nature of Christianity forever. Mary Wollstonecraft cared for the disenfranchised women in the context of the oppression of the British state. So again, oppressive moral order. This is late 19th century England, We have the oppressive moral order where women are not allowed to vote, they're not allowed to partake in the political sphere by law. And so, again, there's an oppressive moral order, and is a category of people that are oppressed. And the assumption, again, I want to emphasize the pattern, the assumption is that those people that are oppressed have value. Now, that's what Martin Luther believed. That's what Mary Wollstonecraft believed. That's what Jesus taught, and that is not what what the Romans crucifying people thought. You see, they didn't think that the oppressed have value or have worth. Theirs was a morality of the master, of a morality of power, a morality of strength over weakness. So I really want to emphasize that the moral grammar um, um, or the moral soil, we might say, from which the Protestant Reformation can grow, in which the suffragette movement can take root. All of the soil is prepared, so to speak, by Christian morality. That's my basic understanding of Holland's point. Um, that's what I'm understanding of it, at least. So these are just examples I'm using to deepen the pattern and help make clear the pattern as it's unfolded through history. So Martin Luther, again drawing on the names Martin Luther King Jr., drawing on the same spirit, actually the same tradition. And Martin Luther King Jr. was a committed Christian. Was a Baptist. Cared for the disenfranchised racial minorities in the context of the oppression of the American state. So again, the whole civil rights movement in the 60s, the 1960s, again, it proceeds from this same premise. We have an oppressive moral order here. It needs to be reformed. This is what the Protestant Reformation, the Reformation was all about, was that we have an oppressive moral order here in the Catholic Church. It needs to be reformed, and let's reform it. And the impetus for that Reformation came from Christ, who, it was perceived, held out this pattern of Reformation, because Christ reformed Roman culture, ancient Roman culture, the greatest power of its time, a power beyond our imaginings, beyond our imagination. You know, it Rome held sway over pretty much the whole of Europe. It was a tremendous, tremendous power structure, and it was reformed through the perception that the oppressed have value, and in a way, the ultimate kind of prophetic, symbolic um, incarnation of this idea is the crucifixion and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Like the idea that Jesus overcame this overcame death, overcame persecution, and this deep humiliation, really, through patience, through being humble, through compassion, um, through meekness, etc. The fact that the perception and the symbol that in his life he embodied that overcoming is like a paradigm. It's like a paradigmatic model on which future generations in history can draw. That idea of the paradigmatic model comes from Mircea Eliade, the historian of religions, who talks about a sacred model. What is sacred is a paradigmatic model. It's like in the beginning this happened, and every moment in history is to a sacred consciousness, like a repetition of that sacred moment. And so Martin So Martin Luther in medieval Europe is drawing on that sacred moment, on that paradigmatic model. Mary Wollstonecraft, late 19th century England, is drawing on the model. Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s in America is drawing on that model. It's the same pattern in different contexts and fueling different movements. And yeah, we have the LGBT rights movement too. All of these impulses, you see, are based on the principle of equality and they're based on the idea really that our differences on the surface, men and women, black and white, straight and gay, like these divisions, that there is something deeper that unites us, that there is a universal identity within the human heart, which unites us, and that's a kind of that's a community beyond the merely political. It's like a transcendent community, and that idea, it again comes from from the Christian tradition and assumptions, because the notion is in Genesis that human beings are made in the image of God, man and woman made in the image of God, so that there is a kind of there is a level of identity which is divine, which is sacred, which is sovereign, and that that level of our identity ought to be the principle upon which we build our culture. But that's a related point, but let me just keep the thread with this. So yeah, okay, each of these movements was successful insofar as they radically restructured, reformed society, and won the moral battle. What I mean by won the moral battle is like each of these movements in the West has succeeded in the sense that like the emergent consensus, in the sense that they led to transformations in the law, and an emergent consensus was reached in which they were proved right, these campaigners. And so I think that's just more evidence for the reality of this moral paradigm, that it's that history has proved it right through moral struggles. That the principle has been given. There is a factual incarnation of an instantiation of this principle. That the oppressed have value, and that we are all equal in the eyes of God, essentially. Yeah, the consensus which emerges historically is that these people were right and their cause was just. Why was this consensus reached? Why did these people win the day? Why do we recognize their causes as just? These are all important questions, why? Why were these movements successful? Well, again, I quite like this image of soil. It's like this paradigmatic model, this sacred model of the life of Jesus, establishes a fertile soil in which these movements can take root. So here we go. So clearly such movements would not have taken root in an ancient Greek or Roman culture, wherein to be good is to be strong and powerful, strength and honor, and to be weak is to be subhuman and worthless. Drawing this out more, Christ as a transformative moment. So a central Christian perception is that God is incarnated as a humiliated criminal. Blessed are the meek, betrayed and put to death by the Roman state. This was to say, in the context of first century Rome, that the locale of divine power was in the lowest of the low, the rejected, weakest, and most despicable character of the whole community. I've already kind of touched on this a bit, but I'm covering it again here. It's Holland, I think, really helps us to go into the Roman mindset in the first century AD. This was the lowest of the low. The people on crucifixes were really advertisements for, they were advertising the power of the Roman state. They were emphasizing the strength and honor of the Roman state and the Roman citizen, and that all that kind of crossed them are weak and despicable and not really worth our consideration at all. So the oppressed are denied of any value or respect, you see. That's the point. And value and respect is accorded to the strong, to the master morality. That is the moral paradigm. That is the lens, the interpretive framework through which good and bad are assessed in these cultures. The implicit message seemed to be that it was not in the pride, the strength, and the dominance of the Caesar that divine power was to be found, which is, what the Romans believed with the cult of Augustus and the cult of Caesar. That victorious warriors were divine. But instead, in the humility, the weakness, and the surrender of Jesus. This is unbelievably transformative and revolutionary. I can't even begin to express it. It sets a whole different precedent for history, because through humility, through weakness, and through surrender, victory is attained. Ultimately, that's what's meant by the story of Jesus. And so martyrdom in Christianity over the next 2,000 years would become a symbol of power. And actually, every Christian that was put to death by an oppressive regime actually built the power of Christendom. Actually, that was what fed this great historical transformation, was through the persecution of Christians, because through martyrdom, the ultimate value of the oppressed was again given given weight, like given credence, given it is all building the argument, basically building the paradigm through the way that Christians live their lives. This idea, so dramatically embodied by the life of Jesus, was explosive. It sent shockwaves through the very fabric of the Roman world, shockwaves which we still feel to this day. So hopefully I've outlined that in the previous slide, and hopefully you're getting the picture here. Let me just go back to this. So what we have is an old paradigm, the life and the teaching and the death and the resurrection of Jesus here, and then a new story, a new dispensation, premised on love, whereas the old one was premised on power. And at every kind of historical moment along this timeline, significant cultural and political movements are drawing their power on this paradigmatic model here, which is the image of weakness transfigured. Right, so we've covered this in a fair degree, but I want to emphasize it more. So let's look at Greco-Roman morality, power, what I'm calling power. The strong are superior to the weak. If you want to understand this, I think it's really powerful to visually and emotionally engage with these ideas. And what came to mind when I was thinking of it was 3 films: the film 300, the film Troy, and the film Gladiator, because the central hero the heroes of each of these films, Leonidas, Achilles, and Maximus, are all warriors, and they all basically live by the credo strength and honor. That's actually what Maximus says explicitly in Gladiator, is strength and honor. But Achilles is all about his fame, about whether his name will echo in eternity, and is all about basically pride and strength. And again, Leonidas and the Spartan culture was based on the same kind of moral assumptions: strength and honor, strength and honor, strength and honor. And let me run through a few things about all of this. So in under Greco-Roman morality, or the master morality, the strong are worshipped as godlike heroes, and the weak are rejected and cast aside. The ethos of is one of strength and honor, as Maximus says in Gladiator. There is a clear pride as Achilles wants his name to echo in eternity in Troy, as I've mentioned some of these things. And as depicted in 300, the Spartans really did abandon their weak and deformed young in the wild. So there's a particular representation of that with Leonidas as a child going out into the wild, and the Spartans kind of leaving their weak and deformed young out on the mountains. So this is a real this is basically an early form of eugenics. So this attitude towards the weak anticipates the eugenics of the 19th century, 1800s, and the ideological basis for Nazism. Roma Invicta, unconquered Rome, was the motto of the Roman Empire. So again, military power, strength and honor, undefeated, the pride in that, etc. The morality followed the Darwinian dictum of survival of the fittest. Only the strong survive. It was brutal in the sense of animalistic, a raw law of the jungle. So let's just unpack that. So eugenics got a kind of intellectual breath of life, you could say, in the mid 19th century, as Darwin wrote his theory of evolution and Herbert Spencer commented on that, coining the term survival of the fittest. And eugenics kind of is basically a biological morality, wherein it's basically saying, look, in nature, the strong dominate the weak, and therefore this premise of the strong dominating the weak should just apply to human morality too. And you see that in basically in pagan moralities, or Greco-Roman master moralities, where Leonidas, Achilles, and Maximus are just incarnations of the strong dominating the weak, and actually they get all the value and the respect paid to them and the honor paid to them because of their ability to kill others, to dominate others, and their strength in battle. Just like the dominant lion or tiger in the wild becomes the the head of the pack. It's kind of the same idea, and I want to emphasize that it's biologically grounded. So the eugenics of the mid 19th century was intellectually and theoretically gave it a kind of breath of life, because Darwin had this massive idea of evolution, and there was a lot of kind of intellectual, I don't know if I'd say credibility, but I think credibility probably is the word. Like, a lot of people around the time that theory was coming out, towards kind of the end of the 1800s, the end of the 19th century, advocated for eugenics, basically saying that only the strong should survive, and that the weak and the deformed should be cast out. And again, I just want to emphasize that this happens in animals. This happens very commonly in animals, in the animal kingdom. in nature as it is, and in the Spartan culture we have early evidence of eugenics, of practices of eugenics, where they were purifying their culture of the weak and deformed by just throwing them out, casting them out. So I really want this to be super clear, because it's a difficult perception to get at because of our moral assumptions in the West today. But really, the weak and deformed were nothing to the Spartans. Like, they would just be left on the mountains to die, left in the wilderness, babies just left undefended in the wilderness to die. And that was nothing to them. Like, it didn't matter. They didn't feel bad about that. They just felt like the weak weren't a category of human, or like they weren't a category of the Greek citizen or the Roman citizen. They weren't a category of person worthy of respect and value. You need to, well, I don't know, you need to, but like, this is something that I'm really starting to get a really deeper sense of. I think these three films, 300, Troy, and Gladiator, all look, they're great films in and of themselves. Like, I really enjoy them. For lots of other reasons, like they're like entertaining films, but I want to point to them all as exemplifying a common thread, which is a certain morality, that of Greco-Roman morality, which is again basically based. It's basically a primitive morality, in a sense that it's just basically an extension of biological reality. And to me, that terrifies me. Like, that moral vision, to me, I find deeply, I don't know if distasteful is even a strong enough word. It's just abhorrent. It's just horrific, horrifying to me, from this current cultural moment we're in, to you, the viewer, in the cultural atmosphere of the West. The idea of eugenics, for instance, seems absolutely horrific. But to the Greeks and the Romans, it wasn't horrific. It just needs to be understood that it wasn't necessarily horrific to them. And so something rather radical, I might add, happened to change that. And I've already suggested what that is, because in this image here, which is a sacred image in the Christian tradition, is the crucifixion. You have, well, Christ is called the Lamb of God. Like, the lamb is what is sacrificed. So the lamb is, oh, so the Lamb of God, it's like the sacrifice of God. So, like, whereas, let me put it this way: the Spartans cast out weak and deformed children into the mountains to die. Christ is like an embodiment of that weak and deformed child, in a way. It's like, and saying, actually, this is how the divine incarnates. This is how the sacred incarnates. When I say divine and sacred, I mean like the ultimate value, like the ultimate of ultimate values has this character. This is the character of the ultimate of ultimates. Tremendously radical and revolutionary from the perspective of first century Rome. So I'm going to draw a bit on Nietzsche here. Nietzsche says, what is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself. What is bad? All that is born of weakness. So Nietzsche wrote a book called On the Genealogy of Morality, on the genealogy of morality, in which he covers a lot of these themes. And Nietzsche is a truly profound thinker and philosopher, and someone who I need to wrestle with and engage more deeply. I've read a fair amount of his work, but it doesn't mean I necessarily understand it. And I'm sure that people will offer, may offer kind of helpful critiques of what I'm saying here. But my basic understanding of Nietzsche is that he is engaged in a similar project to Tom Holland, and saying, look, where do our morals come from? and he basically says that the Christian morality was a slave morality, a morality of the weak over the strong, whereas it subverted the master morality of the times of the Romans, which was all about the strong over the weak. And Nietzsche really was critical of Christian values and saying, look, he has this concept of the Übermensch, or the overman, the superior man, the superior human being. And that Übermensch, that overman, that kind of transcendent, that new vision of humanity is really based on what Nietzsche called the will to power, the will to overcome weakness, the will to a greater intensity of life, a greater way of being in life. And look, there's many things to say about that philosophy and that philosophical position, which I won't necessarily enter into here. But what I will say is that Nietzsche was historically used as, along with eugenics, as a kind of philosophical rationale for the emergence of Nazism in Germany. Nietzsche's sister, I believe it was, kind of promoted Nietzsche's works to Hitler in the early days. So there's associations here. There's stuff going on here at a deep level, I think. And this notion here, let's keep it in mind, is kind of a pithy statement of the master morality. What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself. What is bad? All that is born of weakness. So Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini both take this kind of statement, this moral paradigm, to heart. Like, this is underlying their moral vision. It's there in the background. Nietzsche's done the philosophy, and here we have people acting it out. So in Italy, the fascism that emerged there from Mussolini. Here we've got an image of Mussolini next to, I think it's Augustus Caesar. And central to this vision was Romanitas, Romanness, a cultural identity modelled on the values of ancient Rome. And here we have a propaganda piece that says, we dream of a Roman Italy. So again, with everything I've said about Greco-Roman morality here, what I've heard Tom Holland allude to and suggest, and which I'm trying to draw out and illustrate here, is that part of what happened with fascism as it emerged in Italy was a kind of rejection of Christian morality and a reversion to basically pagan morality, to an idea of the strong over the weak. And particularly this came in with this dream of, we dream of a Roman Italy. Augustus Caesar here as a moral exemplar for Mussolini. It's kind of like a regression, we might say, a regression to an earlier morality is what was happening in the emergence of Italian fascism. And I'm not going to go into this actually, but this is just illustrating the point of how the propaganda of Italian fascism was all about the revival of Roman culture, the strength, the power, the pride of earlier Roman culture. It's kind of like a revivification. It was all about revivifying that that paradigm, that value system. And of course, Hitler was greatly inspired by Mussolini. And so Hitler said, for example, a stronger race will drive out the weaker ones. For the vital urge in its ultimate form will break down the absurd barriers of the so-called humanity of individuals to make way for the humanity of nature, which destroys the weak and gives their place to the strong. It's just chilling to me, like really chilling. But look, the humanity of nature. So again, we have some themes here: biology, Darwin, eugenics, strong versus weak. If you look in the natural world, you can see the rational element of what Hitler's saying. It's like there's a lot of domination of the strong over the weak. In a way, it's natural, it's biological. Does that mean it's good? Does that mean it's right? Well, these are the questions we're wrestling with. But I'm saying no, it doesn't. I'm saying that there is a transcendent morality. There is a sense in which that those natural assumptions and that power morality, that dominance morality, can be transcended, and that way is love, and that way is kind of opened up through the life of Christ, and that is a religious, spiritual, and transcendent vision and assumption, and it cannot be grounded in or rooted in the purely biological, the purely natural. So like it's really helpful, I think, to understand the thought patterns of Hitler and Mussolini. What were they were thinking? Mussolini was kind of fetishizing the Caesars, Augustus, Roman culture. What was Roman culture? Roman culture was strength and honor and crucifixion, and the oppressor is stronger and entitled to be stronger than the oppressed because they're victorious or powerful or dominant or a great general or something like that. Mussolini was idolizing that culture, and that was really central to the emergence of Italian fascism and or fascism as it emerges in Italy. And Hitler looks to that for inspiration. He says that is great, and he says this, what I've written here, about stronger races dominating and purging out the weaker. And you know, I think there's something too to note here, which is that part of the fabric of Western assumptions here in 2020 is we don't want what happened with Hitler. We don't want Nazi Germany. In fact, the whole World War II in Europe was fought over that issue. Like it's a historical, it's a playing out of these intellectual ideas. It's a playing out of these abstract ideas in the flesh, in the body. Okay, and we had a world war. We had World War II over this issue. You know, should the strong dominate the weak, and should the oppressor rule, or do the oppressed have value? Okay, and we decided by consensus, like the victory of the Allies was, in a sense, a winning of the argument in the flesh, in history, not just a winning of the intellectual argument, but a winning of it in terms of just the horror of Auschwitz, the bodies of the war, and the values over which we fought that war. So I think there's real historical weight behind this moral vision that emerges, which emerges in the first century AD in the life of Jesus. So yeah, I'm just like really making the point clear here with what Hitler's saying. Look, he's saying eugenics, natural, biological, lions, deers, that's what humanity is. It's just a game of strong. It's a power game of the strong dominating the weak, and that's just the way of nature. So let's just be strong. Like that's kind of the argument. I've covered eugenics a bit already. So the theory was given intellectual weight in the mid-19th century, drawing on Darwin. Spencer calls it the survival of the fittest. the Spartans practiced eugenics, and you could argue that the Roman Colosseum, as seen in Gladiator, was like a ritual form of eugenics. It's like, the strongest, most glorious gladiators will survive, and the rest will die off, and we don't care about the rest because it's strength and honor, This was the paradigm. The Colosseum still stands in Rome. Like, that is a legacy of the ancient world. That is how it was. That is how they viewed things. And so, yeah, hopefully I've laid out, the pattern of the inversion of and the subversion of that paradigm. It's quite the opposite. It's saying, the weak, the deer here, the weak has value because the weak has value, and that the oppressed and the weak have value is an image and a symbol and a perception that gives is the soil in which things like the Protestant Reformation, the suffragette movement, the civil rights movement, the LGBT rights movement, these cultural movements are able to take root in a soil that is prepared by um, by the life of Jesus, and hopefully I've laid out kind of why that was, because there was this really maybe the most powerful, well, it definitely was the most powerful social system in the world at that time was ancient Rome, and in the midst of that was just someone who was humiliated, just like many other criminals at the time, humiliated, put to death, suffered greatly, and overcame that. That is the Christian story, at least, and overcame that through the resurrection, and was therefore blessed in the eyes of God. And what was God was an incarnation of God. Again, this is the Christian story. This is I don't necessarily want to argue, get down on the resurrection of Christ, for example, because it's a very complex issue. But I suppose it would be sufficient to say this, that people who did believe that, and that is a story people told, and because they told that story, the older moral order became inverted. There was a precedent for the inversion of and the overcoming of that moral order. Now, did that moral order die? Is it completely gone? Well, no, because it's grounded in the natural, it's grounded in the biological. And so there's almost there's like a temptation. That's why we had Hitler, that was not long ago, a few generations ago. Hitler happened because it's kind of like that's a pattern of thought that can happen in the human mind, and it's arguably a natural pattern, arguably a biologically, it makes intellectual sense on a purely biological level. Now, what Christianity does, I think, is offers a trans-biological, I don't know if that's the word, a beyond the natural, a beyond the biological order of things, and new dispensation, through, and a new set of values, new way of being, through which we can transcend that merely biological morality. And that new dispensation is the dispensation of love, and the overcoming of power through love. So maybe I'll end it there. Carl Jung had an amazing quote which sums it all up, where he said, where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. The one is the shadow of the other. That's what Jung said. Yeah, so of course I've covered a whole lot of ground here. I'm sure there will be objections to this argument presented. I'm yet to finish Tom Holland's book. I'm halfway through it, so I'm sure I'll learn a lot of things through reading that. The intellectual resources
gathered for this presentation were reading Tom Holland's book, listening to Tom Holland in interviews on YouTube, really absorbing the story that he's telling. Having read Nietzsche, having been wrestling with Nietzsche's ideas for some time, having watched films like 300, Troy, and Gladiator, having that part of the cultural milieu in which I've grown, and having those reference points there ready to hand. Having read the Bible and looked at Christian ideas, and there are a lot of different reference points that have come together. And this is just, again, I want to emphasize with great humility, this is just my interpretation of things, my understanding of things, where my thought is at with the whole thing at the moment. I don't want to mischaracterize Tom Holland's argument. This is my interpretation of it. This is how I understand it. And I think it's a tremendously powerful story. I think it's true. I think it's true in the sense that the principles are validated by the facts, as I've said, with the Reformation, the suffragette movement, the civil rights movement, and World War II. All of these historical movements and the consensus which emerges from them in history, to me, are evidence for the truth of the so-called new dispensation, that love is greater than power, that there is a transcendent level of identity which reaches beyond the biological, beyond the biology of sex, of race, of anything else like that. The biological kind of contingencies, the biological aspects of our nature, and there is another order and dispensation in which we exist, and that is more true and more real than that. And I think that truth is played out in history, as I've argued, and I think that all of that comes from this ancient moment wherein a crucified criminal is humiliated and put to death, and that people behold that, and behold that this crucified criminal has resurrected, and thus is divine, and is loved by God, and is the love of God, and is the Lamb of God, etc. The fact is that people had this perception in the first century AD. Whether I don't want to get in necessarily to the whole question of the resurrection. People had this perception. People told this story. People bore witness to this event, and because of that, a new dispensation was ushered in, and because of that, an impulse of reformation, of reforming an oppressive order, and drawing in the oppressed. You see, it's not about it's about noticing where there are people oppressed and powerless in the world, and going to them in the spirit of love and drawing them in to the broader kind of universal community and the universal communion established by this new dispensation, this new plane. And so there's lots of ways to understand the meaning of love, but that's hopefully one of them. So that's, to me, what is meant by the triumph of love. And I hope you got a lot from that presentation. I'm completely open to any feedback or critiques you might have, so please do leave them in the comments. This is a summary of my perspective, my position, and my interpretation of Tom Holland's work. And yeah, hopefully it brings it to life for you. Hopefully it encourages you to go and get the book Dominion by Tom Holland and read that, and listen to Tom Holland speaking on YouTube, because I think he's making a tremendously powerful case, which is grounded in history, and that I find I find it tremendously powerful and convincing. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention. Really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and yeah, thanks for watching.